Hi, good morning, everyone. Let me introduce myself. My name is Sim Bajpai, and I'm the Director of Business Operations at Innovizant. Innovizant LLC is a full-service analytics provider leveraging data science to assist our financial services clients, banking, insurance, and credit unions business in achieving their business goals. And we are glad that we have participants from all of these domains, banks, credit unions, and our partners as well. Some of our accelerators and solution frameworks assist our clients, including FinCDO, Basel Pro, and SmartCECL. Today's webinar is about what is CECL and how Innovizant is helping its clients for CECL compliant on time. The webinar is presented by Mr. Souvik Das, who has over 17 years of experience in data management and analytics for financial services industry. Souvik was also instrumental in ideating and implementing the Smart CECL solutions. Before going ahead to the webinar today, a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, please drop in a message on the control panel of the GoToWebinar. We'll bring them up at the end of the session, for which we have allocated 10 minutes. And let me tell you that this call is being recorded and will be available and sent after the session. So without any further delay, let me pass on the session to Souvik. And I'm sure that we have a lot to learn about CECL today.
Okay, thanks, Sim. Good morning, everyone. I still see people joining in, so perhaps we'll give them about 30 odd seconds before we get started. Many thanks for joining this webinar. We are really excited to host you here. As Sim has mentioned, my name is Souvik Das. I come with little less than 18 years of experience in data management. Presently, I'm heading the practice of data science at Innovizant. In the context of today's discussion, which focuses on CECL, I have practical experience in leading CECL implementation grounds up, as well as was part of the team at Innovizant that ideated and built our proprietary SmartCECL product, which I intend to show to you a little later. But before I go forward, maybe I'll give another 10-15 seconds odd for the rest of the folks to join in, and then I'll get started. Okay, I'll get going. So I hope you can all see my screen. The way we have structured our presentation today is that we have broadly categorized or structured our discussion into 3 sections. In the first section, we'll talk about what is CECL, who is impacted, when would this need to be implemented. Sorry, there's a bit of throwback. So is it possible to mute the participant? Okay. So the first section would be about what is CECL, who's impacted, when would this need to be implemented. The second section would focus on the modeling aspect of CECL. And the third section is really about what Innovizant is doing, what is my company doing in this regard. There is a solution that we have built. We have productized it. We will take you through the product as well as some of the other key capabilities we have got. The first 2 sections are not really an Innovizant pitch. We'd be really happy if this becomes an educational pitch, if you can learn something from it and if you can take it out. While you'd be excited to touch base with you later if you find our products and offerings really helpful for you. And as Sim mentioned, I'd encourage you to log your questions while the presentation is on. We'll take them up towards the end of the discussion, and in case we can't, or if you have any questions after the presentation, please feel free to email me or Sim. We've got the contact numbers towards the end of the presentation, and we'll be taking them offline over emails. So with no further delay, let's get started with the first section of today. What is CECL, or the full form being Current Expected Credit Loss? Now, CECL really is an accounting model To be more specific, it's an allowance standard. In short, it means that how allowance for the loan and lease related to losses or all should be all is all ALLL should be calculated and accounted for going forward. It came about in June 2016, and it is set to replace an accounting model which is there in the being for last 40 odd years. Now, to understand CECL, we need to understand IFRS 9 a bit. So the genesis of CECL is really that standard, which is called IFRS 9. IFRS 9 is the new International Financial Reporting Standards promulgated by the International Accounting Standard Board, or IASB. IASB's jurisdiction is worldwide. The standard covers predominantly three broad topics: the classification and measurement of financial instruments, hedge accounting, and lastly, the impairment of financial assets, and that's going to be the focal point of our discussion. Now, impairment of financial assets, or the financial assets which are showing signs of distress, the idea here is that rather than waiting for any loan or credit or debt instrument to show any signs of distress or trigger threshold, this IFRS 9 standard mandates that right on day one, at the time of origination, the banks or the financial institutions that are lending must reserve against the loan. IFRS 9 says that if the credit has not shown any signs of impairment, a bank should reserve for 12 months of losses. But if it has indeed shown signs for impairment, then the institute should reserve for the lifetime of losses. Now, coming to the US, FASB, which is the Financial Accounting and Standard Board, which is the American body that mandates accounting standards, while inheriting IFRS 9 and creating CECL, it kind of simplified that clause. Essentially, what it means is that they have really got around that 12-month period, and what they have said is, any loan during the point of origination, the bank should make provision for its lifetime of losses. So it's much more simplified, much more simple to understand when it comes to CECL. The CECL standard, as I said, it's 2016 when it was published, but June 2016 when it came about, it was really broad level principles. Since then, FASB has been publishing articles. I think the last one came in April. And we expect finer clauses and articles to come forth in the with specifics around the standard going forward in coming months and years. Now that we know what is CECL, let's talk about what has changed. What has changed from the existing model? There are quite a few changes. The left-hand side of the slide shows to you the previous model. It is perceived that it is part to blame for the financial meltdown in 2008. It is kind of retroactively, the existing model retroactively looks back at the previous set of events. It looks at the incurred losses. It's really a reactive, backward-looking kind of a model. It is now what we are doing now here through CECL is we are trying to get rid of that and trying to come up with a forecast-based, risk-based model, and kind of proactively trying to gauge what is the risk and protect the banks and institutions against them. But from 2008 up until this point, obviously Feds have implemented various other measures to protect banks, the predominant ones being CCAR and DFAST. But CECL is the accounting standard, the exposure against loan measurement standard, which is changing. We are going to spend some time on this particular slide so that we understand this in detail, that what are the changes that the institutes need to go through. As of now, the primary factor, primarily the accounting modeling would rely on charge-off rates, where the CECL would rely on the lifetime of loan data. Unlike the current accounting model, the historic data that CECL would depend on would not be annual loss rates, but the life of loan or life of portfolio loss rates. Unlike the current model, in CECL, we'll need to consider the account credit risk attributes, um, as well as segmentation details and explicit economic sensitivities for foreseeable period. Most of the banks today, even outside the realms of FAS 5, they do consider credit risk attributes, but now really the accounting standard mandates you to consider them. So there is a change in that. Now even economic sensitivities, both at the company level as well as macroeconomic level, like interest rate, moving up and down by the Feds, it's only going to move up going forward, or that's how it is perceived. Unemployment rate for the foreseeable future would all need to be taken care of while calculating CECL going forward. For the most banks, this foreseeable period is turning out to be 24 months on go-forward basis. Post this forecastable period, where banks have very minimum visibility, unadjusted historical loss of averages would need to be considered and applied to derive the expected loss for the entire lifetime of a loan. Other than that, CECL, another factor that we would need to also understand is the Q factor, or in other words, a qualitative factor. In 2006, interagency policy statement came out, and Q factors are analyzed and quantified in order to adjust historical loss rates for the difference between conditions that existed over the period of historical credit loss rates. Now with CECL, no longer does the time period stop at the measurement date, but it continues towards the end of the contractual term of the loans of the portfolio. Where CECL calculation might get complicated is because different loans behave different ways for different period of time. Just to give you an example, future interest rates in all likelihood would increase, and that would have different kind of effect from fixed rate loans to variable rate loans. And even for the variable rate loans, the ones that are maturing over next 2 years, the impact would be different from the ones that are going to mature, let's say, over next 10 or 12 years. So these are some of the major changes that we see coming through while coming to the CECL calculation. But the most prevalent impact is perceived to be the increased quantum of reserve now the banks and credit unions and financial institutes would need to keep for all loans and leases to comply with this standard. ABA, which is American Banking Association, that's best guess at this point in time is that the overall allowance would increase by 20 to 50%. There, obviously, as we go through this presentation, we'll take you through a bit more detail about the attributes that are needed, the modeling aspects that are needed for CECL calculation. But let's first talk about when it's going to be implemented and who's going to be impacted. CECL for SEC registrants will be applicable from 2020. For the rest of the world, it's going to be 2021. It sounds like some time away just by the looks of it, but for multiple reasons, it is widely advised by various public and private institutions that the right time to prepare for CECL is now. Let's look at some of the reasons why we all prescribe, Innovizant also corroborates to that view that we should start now and should not wait till a later point in time. Why it is important that we should look at CECL implementation right now is because methodology changes. The method with which for last 40 years the banks have been measuring accounting exposure, the all is changing. So there is a method change, there is a process change involved here. The data requirements would change. We'll come to that a little later. Capital adjustments need to happen, and not only that, downstream the AMLs, the capital management would all need to consider the CECL output. Communication, education is a big part of the change, as well as the impact. Now, the way we kind of view that is that forget about the technical nuances and process nuances. I think the first thing that one need to do is to educate the relevant workforce about CECL. A huge historical overhang that we need to kind of change. It requires organization change management. Secondly, from data standpoint, we need to start now because there is a very valid reason for it that CECL would require much granular level of analysis for forecasting than the existing accounting model. And that due diligence would need to start now. Without that, come 2020, you might not have right level of historical data to even forecast on. Traditionally, for vast majority of CUs, and this is one thing that we are going to also focus on one particular slide, they are not really focused on analytics. Analytics for many CUs, it's not a core competency. So CUs would need to now think about how to instantiate that. And lastly, impact of CECL is supposed to be wide. FASB expects banks to embed the outcome of CECL in their asset and liability management, in their capital management, in their profit and loss statement, the current accounting. So in effect, the downstream impact is perceived to be huge, as well as the communication and socialization aspects to the stakeholders. So all in all, if you think about all the impact, the all-encompassing impact, I think the time frame that everybody is really recommending is now rather than later. Now, we thought that credit union, we should put some focus on that and explicitly mention about the credit unions. Now, why they're different credit unions like any other financial institutions? Obviously, they issue debt instruments for most of the CUs that we have come across, and they will come under the jurisdiction of CECL. But the reason why we thought mentioning CUs is really relevant here is because, as I mentioned before, vast majority of them, they don't have analytical capabilities of advanced level. But that said, huge amount of member base is associated with them in this country. So while some of the CUs can always go for buy option than building something from the grounds up, they at least need to start focusing on the data collection, segmentation of their data, zeroing on the correct data sets, both horizontally and vertically, as well as doing some base analysis of their data set. Outside of that, the impact seems to be as as it is with any other financial institution. Now, quickly moving on to the next topic, how CECL is kind of overlapping with the other relevant functions. We mentioned very briefly about AMLs, the capital management, which is the bottom eclipse that you see, planning and budgeting, and finance and treasury. CECL also is not only a challenge, it also presents you with opportunities, and we'll talk about briefly going forward where I think the portfolio management aspect would come into play. But let's focus on this particular section, how CCAR and DFAST and CECL, they are overlapping. This is one of the questions that we get asked quite frequently. That can I use the same models that I am using for my CCAR or my DFAST and get it done with? Our viewpoint here is aligned with that of ABA's, which is CECL could be viewed as a good basis for both DFAST and CCAR testing. Now, banking regulators might supervise these banks to integrate the models. But while CECL may be a good basis for DFAST and CCAR testing, some current DFAST and CCAR models may not necessarily comply with CECL. This is because the target data set could be different. DFAST and CCAR testing are based upon open books of business in which new loans are being made and existing loan payoffs throughout the stress testing period. In contrast, CECL is an estimate of one specific set of loans at a specific date. Therefore, loss forecasting models maintained by some banks used in DFAST and CCAR purposes may apply annualized loss assumptions instead of life of loan loss assumptions required for CECL. So in very simplistic terms, the baseline attributes and the content of the data would change between CECL and DFAST in some particular cases. However, this remains a very open kind of a subject, and we expect Feds and FASB to come and provide guidance in coming months and years as to how CECL can provide some degree of basis for CCAR and DFAST. So we'll take a quick pause. This is also the section where we kind of close out on what is CECL from the functional standpoint. Just to summarize, this is an allowance modeling. This is the outcome of CECL is essentially giving you a sense of what kind of reserve you need to keep to protect your financial institution against the exposure you've got. We will, in the next section, talk about the modeling aspect of CECL. How do you derive what is the right value of CECL? Now, this is still an emerging kind of a discipline. There are many methods that are in play, and even within the methods, the finer nuances are still being developed. We are still in early days of the journey. First, let's focus on the right-hand side of the screen, and let's talk about what are the differences in attributes. Up until now, we have been hugely baselining our models on charge-off data, on recoveries, because our model has so far been really past-facing. Going forward, the delta data requirements that you have got at the very least would include these, the risk rating, as well as the duration of the loan, the segment in which a particular client belongs to, and so on and so forth. These are the kind of attributes through which you can predict how the loss would be, and hence the application of data science and predictive as to how your risk could be forecasted during the entire period of the loan. Remember, some of the loans like mortgages, etc., they run for over 30. Within the forecastable period, you need this these attributes. On the left-hand side of the screen, you see some tidbits about how the data should be collected, in what frequency. Now, like most of the best practices of analytics, this is no different from that. We expect the data, both present and historical, to be collected, deposited, stored in a clean as well as standard fashion within your data warehouse. And we expect the analytics model to to read from the data warehouse either directly or indirectly, and doing analytics on top of it. But the baseline information should come from the data warehouse. So one of the due diligence activity that we propose banks should carry out is what level of information is being captured in the data warehouses today, and what needs to happen tomorrow, whether the data that we are really collecting, whether that is sufficient, or do we need to start collecting more data going forward. What we have observed based on our experience is that some of the attributes that I've shown here, they are not collected at the data warehouse level. So obviously then the point is where exactly they are stored. There, typical core loan origination systems, most of these details would be stored, and then some of them actually would be fed from outside. But in some cases, even those systems don't store this data, in which case we need to start generating them, storing them, so that from this point onwards, whatever data we store can be used as historical data. Anyway, the data submission, this is supposed to happen twice a year, minimum 3 years of data, quarterly, monthly, and the way CECL modeling is defined, it has to be at the level of portfolio at the very macro level, or at the very minimal it should have the data at portfolio level, but you can go down to the loan account level as well. What we propose is get the data as granular as possible so that you have more ability to analyze. Now, some of the models that are used for calculating CECL, the most prevalent one, and we're going to talk about a lot about this particular model today, is called PDLGT model, and this is the first one. There are other models in place. Some of them are migration analysis, loss rate methods. Loss rate method is perhaps the most stereotypical of the ones that we have been using so far, which is to just take historical loss rate and just apply that on the span of the loan. Vintage analysis, this is one that are also useful. vintages are mostly used where the company mostly focuses on mortgages. Vintages, of course, it's a collection of mortgage-based loans, predominantly in the retail area, where you can categorize them based on super prime, subprime, prime, and you can analyze them differently based on the category of loans. But for today's discussion, obviously, we're going to focus on the most popular one, which is PD LGD. What you would need to do, obviously, is to see the fitment, what is the right model for you, and what kind of tools and technologies you can use. There are different built-in kind of products that are available in the market, but what model is suitable for you is subject to due diligence. Now, PD-LGD, which we are now going to focus on, it calculates the expected loss, or CECL, with three components. The first one is PD. PD is probability to default. Now, probability of default over a particular time horizon is really the forecastable time horizon. The default probabilities may be estimated from a historical data, and typical ways of doing it through data science is to use the decision trees or logistic regression. Now, what it gives you is really a fraction. For a particular loan account, it would give you a fraction which is like, let's say 0.73 or something. That is the percentage probability or fraction probability for a loan account to default. Obviously, how the model will derive that is how you build the model. The model will be built, it will be fed with historical data, it will be tried and tested on the historical data, and based on that it will essentially give out the probability of default. The next one is loss given default. The concept is very simple to understand, and it is really the total outstanding debt. Let's say a person, John, he has taken $200,000 of mortgage, and the bank has taken the condo as its collateral, and if the bank sells it, really at the point of default, it gets 160,000. So the loss given default is the principal minus the collateral, which is 40,000 divided the principal. So what is the total fraction? It comes out as a fraction and percentage as well of loss. The bank or the financial service company which is lent is going to suffer at the point of default. The last one is exposure at default. But before I go there, loss given default LGD is perhaps the most challenging of these three components to derive. What we are seeing is there is a pattern that even some of the outside vendors are providing data models as well as some of the data for some of the segments to derive LGD. This is where the analytics methods become really complex. The last one is exposure at default. It's the unit of this one is USD. It is the total exposure that a bank has while a loan has defaulted. You derive all three, multiply them, and then you essentially get the total expected loss. That is the very amount that you need to reserve to protect yourself against that loss mandated by CECL. Now, this is valid for a loan account. You roll it up, this becomes valid for a portfolio. You roll it up, that becomes that gives you the total amount that you need to reserve at LOV level, let's say commercial lending or mortgage or auto leasing, etc. And you roll it up further, you can get the total amount that you need to keep as capital to protect yourself against exposure at company level. So that's about the model, but before you get into the model, what are the steps that you need to carry out? So I'm going to take you through the red pillars here first, and then I'm going to get slightly deeper into it, and then we're going to substantiate that with an example. First and foremost, we need to get good data, and the data here, as I mentioned before, we expect data warehouse to hold clean historical as well as present data from where we can get the data set. Once the data set is obtained, we first do an imbalanced classification, which is really, if you have any synthetic data generation you need to carry out, you do that, and then you find out what is the response variable through which you figure out what is the percentage default and percentage non-default kind of data set. It is a way of classifying your data. In simplistic terms, you figure out which of the historical data sets have defaulted, which of the data sets have not, and from there you try to figure out the pattern in the subsequent steps. Once the classification is done, you go to the next step and we carry out the data exploration and analysis. These two steps are kind of feature engineering in data science lingo. In the data exploration and analysis, what we do is we identify the variables, and within those variables we then carry out univariate analysis, which is really taking one attribute at a time and carrying out their means, the minimum, the maximum, the standard deviation, and all of it. We will get to that in a bit, but other than univariate, we also carry out multivariate analysis to establish the correlation between two or more variables. We impute missing values, and we also do the outlier treatment. Outlier treatment is required because some of the data would be so off that if you feed them into the model would not be giving you the right kind of result because they don't fall into the usual spread of the data. Then if there is any transformation that we need to carry out, for instance, changing the data from varchar to numeric and so on and so forth, we can do that. If you need to force create any variable, we have to do it here. At this level, once this stage is done, our data is ready to be fed into the models. So we then feed into the models. Usually there will be 2 or 3 categories of models that will be available at this stage. If you're following PD, LGD, then one set of models will give you the PD factor, one set of models will give you the LGD, and exposure would also be calculated either through models or by standard math, and then they will be calculated and CECL will be provided back to you. At least for the secured loans, we see adjustments also to be part of it. So most of the products would give you a feature for the user to manually enter the adjustment figures, because business users are really close to those accounts. Then automatically generating it may be prudent doing it that way. In next few slides, we're going to describe very briefly what each of these steps are, like variable, univariate, all these steps that I have kind of described very briefly here. I'll keep it short and brief, and we will also talk about it when we go into the demo. So variable identification is, it doesn't start at this phase. It actually starts in the due diligence, where we, the IT, the business, the functional experts, they sit together, they figure out what are the attributes that would be needed to carry out the CECL exercise and derive the value of CECL. Once you have derived that, you need to figure out what is the response variable. We have done some analysis, and in that we have considered charge-off as a response variable. It's a standard method also to use charge-off for that purpose. Simply put, loan records with charge-off amount are classified as default, and they are assigned a value of 1. For the rest of them, we have considered them as non-default, put a value of 0 for further analysis. And then we categorize the variables into 2, either categorical and continuous, and we have then carried out different sets of analysis based on the kind of variable they are. Moving on to the univariate analysis, it really is about determining different kind of attributes of the content of a particular attribute at unitary level. So minimum, maximum, first quartile, third quartile. and so on and so forth. Why this is important is because sometimes through this you figure out what are the outliers, although there are other methods to find that as well. Multivariate is the means through which we establish correlation between two or more variables. In this case, we have kept it to two. And then missing values treatment is where the data is missing through different methods, usually mean, mode, zero imputation, or there may be other methods through which you fill out the missing values. Unless that is done, the model outcome and the build-up will not be appropriate. And then the outlier treatment. So univariate analysis or some other analysis would give you the values where there are outliers. In this particular case, you can see that the maximum value is really way off than the rest of the spread of the loan credit score. So we really need to look at that particular record, or maybe a few record set, why they're so off, and find a way to either correct them or take them out of the equation while deriving the model, whatever is appropriate. Now, all of this is done before we feed the data into the model and use them to mature the model. So once all of that is done, the next thing that we do is to calculate the PD, the LGD, the EAD, and then in effect the CECL. The first thing is PD. The very conventional way of calculating PD is through decision tree. We have done the same here, and I'm going to take you through an example for those who are not familiar with decision tree. This might help. So here is a decision tree which will be obviously matured as you feed and train this model with your historical data. After that, this model is built, the thresholds are set. This is John, who has taken auto loan, and for his auto loan, the data elements, the content of the data attributes are given here. So loan type is 332, loan interest is 1.4%, and so on and so forth. If you follow John through the decision tree, you will see that he is following these nodes. So John, the customer, his loan type is less than 366, so he's falling here. His loan interest is 1.4, so he's coming here. If you follow him through, in effect, at the end of it, you will get a probability of John defaulting for this auto loan. So in effect, this decision tree will give you a percentage, and obviously the way it is built is through training the model as well as through our experience. The outcome of this is the probability at which John will default. The next one is LGD. As I said, it's the most complex component to calculate. And for that matter, for the same John, we need to create, we have used gradient boosting here, multiple trees, approximate hundreds of them, and we have taken an average to predict the correct level of LGD. There is the next component, which is exposure, which obviously we have a formula to calculate what is exposure as well before you multiply that with LGD and PD. It's a linear regression model. Usually most of the products, they would give you a mathematical under the hood kind of a capability to calculate EAD automatically. EAD thumb rule is, unless inflation is off the chart, it is not, it cannot be more than the principal amount. Now, very quickly, I'll touch upon the CECL disclosures as mandated by FASB, and then we'll move on to the next section of our demo. And in the demo, this particular module that we have showcased, we follow the PD-LGD model as well in our SmartCECL product. So we'll explain this a bit more, but the essence, just to reiterate, calculate the PD through the modeling that you do, calculate the LGD, calculate EAD, multiply them, get the CECL value or allowance value. But before that, obviously, you need to get the data preparation, the feature engineering, and all of it out of your way. Some key points: the artifacts or some of the key parameters that the banks and CUs would need to submit or disclose to FASB would be: what are the assumption, what are the framework that we have used, what kind of segmentation have we implemented, calculation mechanics, and some of the process and the disclosure alignment. And on the right hand side, you see some of the risk characteristics provided here. We will circulate this deck offline for your consumption at leisure. Hopefully you'll find that useful. How this will be built, we have kind of touched upon it, but at a very high level, one can build it in-house, one can buy it, or it is also possible that one can completely outsource it, give the critical data elements out to a vendor in a secure fashion and get the allowance data in. Given that it is going to be an annual affair, this sounds like a logical step, but in terms of maturity in the industry, what we have seen is most of the banks or financial institutions, they're just going to the first few stages of CECL and figuring out what is the best fits solution for them. We have got about 20 minutes left, so I'll be prudent about time. The CECL calculation, really, it gives you some opportunities as well, kind of as byproduct. Probability of default, when you calculate that, you can really feed that information to target new customers with low probability of default, essentially used for cross-sell, upsell, as well as marketing campaigns. And for the ones who are higher in terms of probability to default, you can take actions to recover loan on time. If you know upfront that the person is more has more propensity to getting defaulted on that particular loan. On loan provisioning, although CECL doesn't mandate it to work that way, but we believe that it can be implemented, instantiated in your organization in such a way that it can be fed into your underwriting system, and even before provisioning, some of the critical decisions can be taken based on the information that we are getting out. The last section we are going to jump into is Innovizant's CECL capabilities, which is essentially our capabilities. We've got multiple solutions for different functional areas. The one that we're going to talk about is SmartCECL. It is proven, as we said, that we implemented that for a bank which is now maturing it and training its model with more and more data. And it's proving out to be quite quite a robust kind of a solution. Built specifically to manage CECL complexity, and I said that functionally it is really complex if you consider the loan spread that a large bank would have, combined with the fact that it is high performant. I will also just quickly open up the screen, how it looks, and then before I take you through some live data samples, I'll provide some prudent points, some key points about the solution. So with that, just a moment, I'm going to switch to the product. And okay, Sim, can you confirm that my screen is visible?
Yes, your screen is visible.
Yes, your screen is visible. Okay. And okay, this is a traditional problem with the Mac. Just give 1 sec, it's coming up. So this is SmartCECL. We'll get started. This is how the front page of the tool looks like. This is a limited version that we are showing today. Many of the features are really disabled. We have, first of all, we've created that on RShiny. This can get data from relational databases as well as Big Data Hive, as well as in-memory, as well as Excel. It can, the input data really doesn't, it can reside in any form. The second point is, if you click on that, you'd see that the kind of categories of loans that we have considered here is a vast majority of loans categorized by secured and unsecured that we consider and we expect folks to feed in. Why do we do it this way is because as we progress through this model, under the PD module, we have got about 16 odd models tailor-made for the kind of loans you are feeding the model to. The same goes for LGD. We have got about 16 LGD models that are running, and based on what kind of loan you are feeding in, the respective model will be executed.
Souvik, sorry to
Um,
interrupt you. The project page is not visible.
Sorry, can you confirm that now that everything, my
Not
product is
yet.
visible?
Not yet.
Okay.
Yes, it is visible now.
Yes, it is visible now. Okay. All right. Apologies for that. Apparently, I had to stop and restart my broadcasting again to make it visible. So I'll repeat what I just said very quickly. This is the first screen that you can see for, sorry, this one. In the landing screen, we have got multiple categories of loans, and it can be leases as well. And based on the kind of loan information that is fed in, the kind of models will be executed both under PD as well as LGD. At this point in time, we've got 16 each, 16 models for PD, 16 models for LGD that we have got under the hood. We obviously can extend that solution based on the specific needs. For the purpose of this demo, what I'll do is I will quickly select these three kinds of loans, two secured and one unsecured. I've got a limited sample file for each of them, so I'm going to load it. And while I'm loading it, I'm going to talk about the auto load feature here. Okay, so the first one is the personal loan. So let me see. The second one is auto loan. And the third one is the mortgage. Now, while we have selected CSV files and loaded it, we don't expect that to happen when the product is matured, the pilot phase is done. We expect this auto load feature to kick in. Auto load feature is essentially you show this product where to go and get the data from, and you schedule it through a control script, and it then runs at the interval that you want this model to run, the product to run. While you are testing it and just building it, perhaps this manual load is important, but while you have automated it, the auto load feature would come handy. After the loan data or lease data is loaded, what you then do is validate the data sets. If you remember what I showed in the deck, the first thing that you need to see is to make sure that the conformance is there. So the data set that is provided is conformed with the layout of the data. What Innovizant has done is we have come up with a standard data model. We expect the data to be deposited before this product picks up in a standard data model. And obviously we can adjust that data model by sitting with you, discussing with you. But once the data model is finalized and data is deposited appropriately and data is fed into this model, we then validate the data set and ensure that the content of the data is complying with the layout of the data. You can also view different reports as to how the data looks like, what are the missing values, how many rows are there with missing values, and so on and so forth. And then you can take certain corrective actions. I'm not going to go there in the interest of time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press next, and we are going to press prepare data. Now, this is the place where feature engineering happens. This is where univariate, multivariate analysis happens. We also impute missing values. If there are transformations, we can execute that. There are different configuration pages that are available with our extended product set, which I'm not showing, but you can write your own transformation logic. You can also change the data layout in the previous step in the extended version of it. At this point in time, before we feed the data into models, we have made sure that the outliers are taken care of. We've made sure that the missing values are appropriately imputed, and the data is in the right state to be fed into the models. Next, what we do is we go to the PD model. We execute the PD model here. As I said, there are 16 odd models we have got underneath. Now, what we are doing here in this particular case, as I am showing, right, it's a sample data set. We have taken historical data set. We have trained the models already, but this time the data that we have fed, they had charge of data to indicate whether that particular record is a default or not. But when model considered that, it didn't consider the charge of data. It just calculated based on what the model would predict, and then compared that with the charge of information. By doing that, it has found out that this is the performance of it. 96% in case of mortgage is accurate, 96% here it's accurate, and in this case 99% is accurate. Imagine this as a kind of iterative build cycle wherein you are still in the process of maturing it and feeding the data with different kind of samples. So at this time, the PD is executed. Obviously, your exposure calculation is not really complete at this point. You still need to move on, and you need to carry out LGD and so forth. But you can download the reports, the PD reports, and see how exactly they look like. I'm going to show all the reports once I've carried out all the steps in a moment. Next, we go to the LGD, we execute LGD, and it takes slightly bit more time, obviously, because of the complexity involved, although the data set is small, and the LGD is calculated. Once the LGD is calculated, what we do is, again, one can download the LGD reports and see how the LGD is looking like. The next one is risk exposure. It's a simple calculation where we just multiply different factors and we come up with it. So you can see that secured loans and unsecured loans, these are the balances with the data set that we have got. This is the total loss that we have to safeguard ourselves against, or the bank has to safeguard against themselves. And this is for the unsecured one. For the secured one, you've got the provision to make adjustments. It can be positive adjustment, negative adjustment. You put a figure accordingly, the total loss will be calculated. It is nothing but balance minus collateral minus or plus adjustment based on what kind of data you have got, and the total loss will be calculated. So this gives you the final figure that you are really looking for while doing CECL calculation. What you then can do is you can see different kind of views. You can start with a portfolio view, and you can get different kind of reports out there. This particular one is PD and number of loans within a particular portfolio. In this particular case, by portfolio we mean auto loans is a portfolio or mortgage is a portfolio. However, different organizations define portfolios differently. For the sake of this particular example, right, what we are trying to show here is that within the portfolio of auto loan, there are about 6,600 odd auto loans, and within which the probability of default in terms of number of loans would be something around 350. The same goes here for mortgages, the same as personal loans. Here is a similar manifestation of it, but for LGD, and again categorized by loan types. The same goes for loan category, loan type. There is a whole host of views that you can see. We have a loan type one as well. You can select the loan type and then you can see what kind of um, PDs and LGDs are there. You can drill down to the absolute data level also if you want. One other thing to mention here is that all these reports that you see, they are by the very nature of CECL, they are both past facing as well as future facing. So they are predictive as well as performance oriented, everything aggregated into one. So when you look at this, this takes into consideration, for instance, how many loans have defaulted historically. It has those figures embedded as well as how many personal loans are going to be defaulted going forward. So there is a prediction aspects of it embedded as well. So in effect, it's because of the nature of CECL, it's predictive as well as descriptive in nature. With that, I will quickly pause and I will go back to the slide for one closing slide, and then we'll take questions. We have got 4 minutes left. Just to close it down, product is something that we have built, but no product is 100% fit. So we understand the need to firstly see whether this product is at all a fit in your case or not. So product fitment to building ROI, to building roadmaps for CECL implementation, the strategic direction, as well as the project charter creation to actually executing the projects. We have got manpower, the people who have done that, the data scientists, domain experts, as well as other kinds of mix of resources. And just before we leave and go for the question answer, just to leave you with this thought that we have got experience, expertise, tools, processes to cater to it, just like any other vendor which have CECL offering. The only difference we have is our product, according to our take. Obviously, it's detailed, it is purpose-built, and it is time-tested. With that, this is our coordinates. You can always reach out to us, and we will also share this voice recording with you. But before we close it down, obviously, I'll leave it to Sim. Sim, what questions have we got? If there are questions, please shoot in my direction, and then we can close it down.
Sure, Souvik. It was a very informative, practical product as well. So now on, we will very quickly start and look for a very interesting audience with us. The first question that we have is, what challenges have you or company faced while implementing CECL? Have you find any opportunities?
Sim, I could not follow you appropriately, properly to the end, but I think you were asking about the challenges.
Yes, correct.
And I'll take that. Yes, correct. Okay, so challenges, I think I said that briefly, that at this point in time, financial institutes are really going to the first phase of the implementation, which is really due diligence, education, piloting, etc. And it's viewed as a transformational kind of a program wherein we are changing something which is there in place for 40 years. So what the major challenge that we see is in the data collection. We have not found, in about 3-4 engagements that we are working on, we have not found a single case where there is a single place where you can go and get the adequate degree of data that CECL mandates. But that adequate degree of data, because FASB's guidance is at a broader level, it's at outline level, that also is an opaque area. So we believe there is a huge scope for due diligence. We believe that there is a huge scope for data collection improvements or enhancements that would come up from those due diligence. We also believe that at this point in time, organizations should, as some of them are, spend on educational side of it, at least for the relevant stakeholders. I think you asked about opportunities also. There are opportunities that we would uncover as we go through the journey. Remember, it's still 3 years out, but what we believe is in the credit underwriting, as well as in the marketing division, different components of CECL that while deriving CECL we will derive anyway will be used. Honestly, we have not crossed the hump yet. We have not gone to the end state to understand it fully. But prima facie, initial year and a half's experience has been like this, that data collection is the major challenge, as well as due diligence and organization change management.
All right.
All right.
The other question that we have
The
is,
other question that we have is,
how is product different from the other
product
credit
different from
service
the
in the market?
service market? Yeah, sure. Good question. I think the see, everybody would claim that their product is the best. There is no denying that fact. It's law of the nature, I guess. What we believe, keeping aside everything else, is that this product is tested. This product is tested in a place which is really, really high in terms of the loan spread, in terms of the heterogeneity of the data set. So we believe the model is robust enough. We believe the model is performant enough, and the model is compatible enough. This can really work on your big data stack. It can work on cloud. It can work on traditional archaic, your on-prem mainframe or relational stack as well. And the most important feature that I believe, if you just leave everything out, is its granularity. The models that we have built over time, there are 32 models in total that we have built, and we are building more. They are purpose built for the category of the loans. So that we have not found in many of our competitor offerings. And lastly, it complies with the regulatory mandates, regulatory standards. I leave it to that, and I think it's subject to experience. So if folks on the call or who would hear that later on the recording, if they give us a chance, I think they will experience it firsthand, and they would agree with us as well. But yeah, those are some of the USPs for this product.
Okay, the third
Okay,
question is,
the third question is,
what is the difference between
what is the
CCAR
difference
and
between
CCAR?
CECL and okay. So your voice broke once again, but I guess you said CCAR. What is the difference between CCAR and this, or is it something different?
Yeah, it is CCAR.
Yeah, it is
Like the
CCAR
separation
and
between
the
CCAR and
separation
CCAR.
between CCAR and CECL. Okay, all right, cool. Yeah, CCAR is built for completely different purpose, right? So as part of CCAR or DFAST, either of it, the bank cannot be both CCAR and DFAST. But in both the cases, as we all know, we are supposed to, the banks or FinServes, they're supposed to provide a bunch of key parameters as well as reports, and then the Feds would run stress test against them to see whether the bank will hold in different kind of macroeconomic situation. That's the purpose of it. It's not really accounting focused. It goes far over and beyond the allowance. CECL is more of an accounting imperative, and it is changing one. So it is there has been an accounting imperative already, and the idea is to change that. There are commonalities also. The same models that you're using in CCAR, some part of it can still be used in CECL, but there would need to be slight adjustments at the very least. And then that can be a good basis for the modified CECL models can be a good basis for your CCAR or DFAST. But if you ask a blanket question, how they're similar or different, well, they're very different in terms of the purpose of those two, compliances, if you like.
All right, so we're running out of time. I will send out all the questions by the Sovix input to the respective attendees, and we would definitely encourage your feedback as well. Sovik, anything you want to say to the audience before ending up the session?
No, I really want to thank everyone for joining this. We will share the recording of this one with everyone, as well as I guess the deck, and if you find it useful. If you find our product to be useful and interesting, do contact us, and we will have focused workshop, focused brainstorming sessions with you, and we'd love to take it on from there. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you, Souvik. And you have been, all the audience have been definitely fantastic. Thank you all for joining in. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.